In this video, I'll show you how to sew the slash dress from start to finish. We're making this one with cap sleeves, but I'll show you how to make it without sleeves as well. Since the puff and pencil patterns are modular, you can add most of our sleeve styles to the slash dress. I've put a link in the description for the mix and match overview so you can see which ones match the slash dress. Before we start sewing, make sure all your pattern pieces are cut out and that you've transferred all notches and dot markings to your fabric. All seam allowances in this pattern are 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch, unless I mention something else. Alright, let's get started. Start by ironing interfacing onto the wrong side of all facing pieces. Next, finish all raw edges with a zigzag stitch or an overlocker or serger. You don't need to finish the neckline, the hem, or the slanted edge of the skirt unless your fabric frays a lot. Now we'll sew the dots. Start with the bust dots on the front. Fold the fabric with the right sides together, match the dot markings, and pin in place. Sew along the marked line starting at the armhole and sewing toward the dot point. As you get close to the point, gently curve the stitching and sew straight off the edge. Tie the threads in a small knot. Press the bust darts upwards. For the back darts, sew them in 2 steps. Start in the middle of the dot and sew toward one point, then repeat for the other side. Again, don't backstitch at the dot points. Press the back darts toward the sides. Now it's time to sew the zipper. Start by placing the 2 back pieces right sides together. Pin them together at the center back. Sew from the center back notch and all the way down to the hem. From the notch and up to the neckline, sew again, but this time with a long stitch length. This is just a temporary seam that will open later. Press the seam allowance open carefully all the way from the neckline down to the hem. Now take your invisible zipper. Place it face down on the wrong side of the dress, right on top of the pressed seam. The center of the zipper teeth should line up exactly with the center back seam line. Position the zipper so the pole sits 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch below the neckline edge. Pin the zipper in place or use Wonder tape if you prefer. Before sewing, I really recommend basting the zipper by hand. Use long stitches and only sew through the seam allowance, not through the outer fabric. This helps keep everything in place and makes the machine sewing so much easier. Once the zipper is basted, carefully open the temporary seam behind it. Use a seam ripper and unpick from the neckline down to the center back notch. Be careful not to open the stitching below the notch. Now you should be able to pull the zipper all the way down. If the pull gets in the way later, you can gently guide it past the notch using tweezers. Attach your zipper foot to the sewing machine. If you have an invisible zipper foot, you can use that, but a regular zipper foot works perfectly fine too. Set your needle to the left position. Start with the right side of the zipper as seen from the wrong side of the dress. Fold the dress fabric slightly out of the way so you're only sewing through the zipper tape and the seam allowance. As you sew, gently roll the zipper coil away from the needle with your fingers so you can stitch as close to the teeth as possible. Sew from the neckline down to the zipper mark and backstitch at the end. Now move to the other side of the zipper. Change the needle position all the way to the right. Again, start at the neckline and sew down to the mark. When both sides are sewn, close the zipper and check it from the right side. The seam should meet nicely at the center back, and the zipper should almost disappear into the fabric. Trim off any excess zipper tape if needed. Now it's time to sew the shoulder seams. Place the front piece right side up and place the back piece on top, right side down. Pin the shoulders together on each side. Sew the shoulder seams on both sides and press the seams open afterwards. If you're adding sleeves to your dress, now's the time to head over to the sleeve tutorial and come back here afterwards to finish the dress. We'll now sew the side seams. Pin the side seams together from the armhole all the way to the hem on both sides. Sew along the edge and press the seam allowances open afterwards. Next, we'll finish the slanted edge and hem using the bias facing. Start by sewing the front and back bias facings together at the hip. Then attach the hem facing to the bias facings. Place the complete facing onto the dress with right sides together, making sure the side seams match. Pin together. Sew all the way around the slanted edge and hem. Trim the corners carefully like this. Turn the facing to the inside and press everything flat with an iron. Top stitch 2 centimeters or 3/4 of an inch from the edge all the way around. Now we'll sew the neckline facing. Start by sewing the facing pieces together at the shoulders. Press the seams open. Turn the dress right side out and unzip the zipper. Place the facing along the neckline with right sides together. Match the shoulder seams and pin all the way around, including along the zipper. Using your zipper foot, sew around the neckline. Along the zipper, switch to a slightly smaller seam allowance of 0.5 centimeters or 1/4 of an inch, so the facing doesn't interfere with the zipper pull. Cut small notches in the curved areas. Fold the zipper corners neatly and turn the facing to the inside. Iron the seam allowance with notches towards the facing. Understitch the facing to the seam allowance wherever possible. If you're making the dress sleeveless, now is the time to finish the armholes by adding the sleeve facings.
Sew both ends of a front-facing piece to a back-facing piece, right sides together. The back and front pieces are not entirely identical, even though it looks like that, so it's a good idea to mark the back of the front piece so you know which side of the dress to attach it to afterwards. Turn the dress right side out. Place the facing on the outside of the dress's armhole with the right side of the facing against the right side of the dress. As you can see here, I've pressed the seam allowance open and flat with an iron. Ensure that the shoulder seams on both pieces match. Sew all the way around the armhole with a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Trim the seam allowance by cutting small notches in all areas where the seam curves. Turn the facing to the inside of the dress. Press the edge flat. You can also sew an understitch to keep the facing secured inside, but that's optional. We also recommend tacking the facing to the dress at the shoulder seam from the right side of the dress to keep the facing in place.
And that's it. Your slash dress is finished. We'd love to see what you make, so don't forget to tag us on Instagram and TikTok and use the hashtag #ppslash.